I want to introduce Abhinav Vallur, a member of the Youth Advisory, Board Standard Reach Lab, to moderate the next discussion on examples of industry interference and marketing of alcohol products to children from around the world. Over to you.
Hi, thanks Kimberly for the introduction. Hello everyone, I'm Abhinav, and I want to start things off with a quick raise of hands. How many of you have seen drinking depicted as something cool or something that you have to try? Yeah, so if I can just get a quick raise of hands. Yeah, thank you. I can see some hands going up already. And understandably so. As youth, we're under the constant bombardment of alcohol advertising, which is subconsciously creating an impression that alcohol is something cool. An example that I can think of is James Bond and his stir and his shaken martinis. I'm sure we're all familiar with something like that. So this is something that Mr. Make highlighted in his presentation too. From movies and YouTube videos to magazines, alcohol advertisements manage to portray alcohol as a luxury that we simply cannot miss out on. Unfortunately, alcohol advertising to youth has become increasingly convenient for companies due to millions of youth being active on social media every hour of every day, which makes youth so easy to manipulate. This is something that we as youth advocates must fight. But first, we need to educate ourselves on the extent of the problem. And who better to enlighten us than our two speakers today, Professor Rohan Maharaj and Ms. Viviana Monge. So firstly, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Rohan Maharaj. He's a renowned doctor and professor of family medicine at the University of West Indies. He authored a book titled Psychosocial Issues in West Indian Primary Healthcare and continues to write in so many medical journals. So Dr. Rohan, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. So I'm here from the University of West Indies. I've been working with the Healthy Caribbean Coalition for several years. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what's been happening in the region. And can we have the next slide, please? So I want to start with a story because I think so often in these talks, we get lost behind all the information and all the data. And it's always nice to personalize it. The story I'm going to tell you is about someone who welcomed me into the neighborhood when I bought my new house. I came into the neighborhood and my neighbor was an elderly gentleman who welcomed us and told us, welcome to the neighborhood, and then became a very good friend. In fact, he started to work at my wife's business. And for many years, he would cut my lawn when I'm busy with my work and developed a nice relationship with our family. On an Easter Sunday, about 15 years ago, he went out with his brother and had a head-on collision and died. And I never thought about how it happened and why it happened. It was all very sad. But we had learned that they went drinking. And unfortunately, when he drank and when his brother drank, they wouldn't just drink one. They would drink and they would drink and they would drink. And they would have 7 or 8 or 10 drinks. And it was an immediate effect on our family because all of a sudden, this was someone who was employed with us. This was a friend, a relative, a neighbor, and our lives changed irrevocably. And on his death certificate, there was no mention about alcohol, right? There was mention about a motor vehicle accident. And that's what I want you to know, that often alcohol strikes on the periphery, often not thought about. We don't see it. It happens so much, especially I'm going to teach you some words at the end of this talk for you young people. But I want you to remember the story. And I try to tell a story in the beginning of my talks because it can so often drive home that whole idea of how alcohol impacts on us, our lives of our families, our parents, our friends. Next slide. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I think this has been covered so well by Mike. Mike, it's always hard to follow Mike. He's such a vibrant speaker and he gives all the right information. So just to let you know that alcohol marketing affects youth. Each advertisement viewed resulted in a 1% increase in number of drinks consumed. Next slide. Exposure to television alcohol brand appearances predicts alcohol brand affiliation and drinking behavior. In a national sample of adolescents who reported on television viewership with a follow-up of 1 year, it showed that there was higher exposure to brand appearances in the television shows was associated with youth drinking. Next slide. And there is the advertising content appeal to youth who are under the legal purchasing age. And we saw in that final slide by Mike how many billions of dollars occur in the sales of alcohol to underage youth. Youth exposed to alcohol advertisements more likely to associate positive and arousing effects with alcohol. And I'll talk to you about the word that we use to describe this later on. Let's look at some of the things that's been happening in the Caribbean region. Next slide. So this is the slide that I'm probably most disturbed at. It's a building brand goodwill among school-age adolescents during the COVID pandemic. So we know COVID has really affected the quality of lives of our people around the world. And the region of the Americas and Latin America and the Caribbean is no different. And what we see in these two photographs are members of the Ministry of Education and a school child receiving branded products from one of the alcohol companies. Now you'll say, well, it's not a big deal. It's just a computer, and our kids, don't our kids benefit from this? But if you look at the computers on the right side of the screen, they have the brand of the alcohol company on it. And what you have is these young people being exposed to this brand day in, day out. And what it just means is that these kids become aspirants towards this brand. They see this brand as being an important part of their lives, part of their past success. And that is what happens when you get exposed to these brands again and again. And so we see the companies, even though they're not selling alcohol, they're making the brands known to our young people. Next slide. And there's lots of slides showing about the marketing during the COVID-19, right? So this one is to be socially responsible, but keep the bars open, right? So this is for Heineken. Next slide. Targeting young women. We see lots of the alcohol advertisements. These are online advertisements targeting young people in the Caribbean, people of color. Next slide. Okay, some more of the same, looking at some sporting activities and young people. And one of the things you see in the ads is that you see that the young people are very young, and they'll tell you, the alcohol companies will tell you, but these are not underage people. But you can well imagine a 14, 15, 16-year-old seeing these young people and really can't decide whether this is someone over their age or someone that they are aspiring to be. And that's the word I want you all to be associated with later on. Next slide. And then this one, of course, using this pop culture, soca culture, calypso culture in the region to develop new ambassadors. So these are young people these are young entertainers that our young people look up to, admire, want to imitate. And so the companies are using the ambassadors who are now not necessarily selling alcohol, but associated with the brand. Okay, next slide. So what can we do about it? So, I think we really need to educate ourselves and educate our youth. Okay? In the absence of any real United Nations with the World Health Assembly action, in the absence of real action by CARICOM, which is the Caribbean community, in the absence of action by our regional governments, we at the Healthy Caribbean Coalition started 6 years ago to have our Caribbean Alcohol Reduction Day. We've been working very closely with the National NCD Alliance globally, with the Global Alcohol Policy Alliance, with PAHO. We receive emails from Movendi every month about what's going on. In my own opportunities, I've taken the opportunities to introduce alcohol into the curriculum of the undergraduate and postgraduate students, educating ourselves and our students, our young people, right? So I've also started a research grant to give to our Caribbean people a small amount of money to encourage research in alcohol. But as you think about what you want to do, I want to draw certain things. Is a lot of the tools and techniques you see being used by the other industries are almost identical to what's happening in alcohol. You can take any of those slides that we saw for tobacco and you can transfer to the alcohol industry. These organizations use the same playbook. And we see that even in the context of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which was a UN-sanctioned convention to support the reduction in tobacco, there's been a lot of pushbacks, there have been a lot of challenges, and proper enforcement has been a real risk. So we have to continue to educate ourselves, educate our youth. The first thing is we have to remember that the alcohol industry has been able to position its product as a commodity. But what commodity is cancerous, addictive, habit-forming, and causes harm to populations? And they will tell you that they are protected by the World Trade Organization as to be traded as a commodity. I want you young people to recognize that that is wrong. If you get a chance to work in law, to get a chance to work with the World Trade Organization, try to change that, right? Alcohol is not an ordinary commodity. Secondly, I want you all to think about the word aspirational. A lot of times, they may not directly sell you alcohol, but you aspire to be that young person who's attractive, that sportsman, that movie star, that pop singer, who you wish to be, who's promoting this topic. And it happens at what we call a very subconscious sort of level. The next word I want you to pay attention to is this word called hegemony. It's pronounced slightly different in the US and the UK, but it basically tells us that alcohol has created a dominance of beliefs and explanations and values that has become accepted by everyone. We don't question it, right? I want you guys to start questioning, what does alcohol mean to me, to my population, to my society, my family, right? And for those of us who live in small island developing states, think of the Caribbean, the SIDS. We in small island developed states, we are running short on a lot of our natural resources. Jamaica used to have bauxite. Trinidad has some oil still, but we're not as much as we used to, right? So our human resources, how we protect our human resources become more and more important. Our Caribbean people spend about a quarter of our budget every year for education and health. But as soon as our young people reach 18, expose them to toxins that are carcinogenic and addictive, things like alcohol, right? So our human resources is now a developmental issue. How we develop as a population depends on our ability of our human resources. And to have our best with human resources, we have to rethink how alcohol impacts on our populations. I think my time is up. I can talk for hours on this. Remember that our time in the future, our human resources is the future of our development in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your inputs, Dr. Rohan. I found it, especially your views on alcohol being a commodity, I felt that was really unique, because oftentimes people treat it as if, alcohol is just another common good, like some sort of snack. But that's definitely not the case. And I think that the youth have some kind of underlying mentality that alcohol isn't as harmful as cigarettes or even drugs, so it should be fine to take. But that's absolutely not the case. Next up, I would like to give a short intro for our next speaker, Miss Viviana Monge. She is a distinguished communications professional. She has a master's degree in educational communication and technology from NYU, and she has been with IAFA, the Institute on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence in Costa Rica, for the past 11 years. Looking forward to a very insightful session with her. So over to you, Miss Viviana.
Thank you, Abhinav. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear.
Okay. So thank you for having me. I am representing today Dr. Giselle Amador, former Minister of Health, who couldn't be here today. But on the subject of alcohol industry's attempt to deteriorate public health measures, I'm going to be presenting to you two specific cases where she was directly involved. Next, please. So basically, I'm going to talk about government rights, essential human rights is the right to health. So next one. We have a law called, well, it's number 9047, and it regulates the advertising and the marketing of alcoholic beverages. There was lobbying in 2012 so that the industry, the alcohol industry, lobbied congressmen, and they proposed a change in this law so that this regulation was weakened. It was transferred from the Institute on Alcohol and Drug Addiction, where I work, to a new office at the Ministry of Health. And by law, with this change, two representatives of the alcohol industry were included in this group for the regulation of advertising and marketing, as well as a member of the Chamber of Commerce. So next one. There was also a negative outcome on the change of this law because it permitted extended hours for selling alcohol from 12, that was before 2012, to now 24 hours. It left free the possibility for small around the corner mini markets to sell alcohol. It extended the possibility of people finding alcohol available within short distances from schools and centers where people underage could be users, just because moms send them to buy their food, or this is very common in Latin America. And local governments were now responsible for these permits, which in turn became very lucrative. So there was a danger of corruption there. The number of permits of a local government allows now, so depends solely on this government. So before, it was regulated by the population on a certain area. Now it depended solely on local government. So you could see how the permits only, just boomed. So the next one. Oh, that's first. So we have sad consequences. The control over advertising was negatively affected because YAFA, where I work currently, was in charge of this regulation for more than 3 decades. The office where I worked for actually was funded and was originated because of that need that was seen in Costa Rica in the 70s to regulate the alcohol industry and their efforts on marketing and advertising. And that knowledge could not be easily transferred to a newly appointed group of people from the Ministry of Health. I mean, we work on the same institution, but they had to go through a learning curve, and also the fact that industry officials, even though as they are now non-voting members, were included in this group, that is clearly affecting the voting of if an advertising passes or not. Because basically that's what this office do. Also, drinking patterns in young people, we started to see a growth, an affectation. So this because YAFA does every 5 years studies on this population specifically. So there's an apparent violation of the principles of objectivity, transparency, and impartiality from that should govern the public function. And due to this clear intention of the producers, it negatively affected the regulation of sales and advertising and sponsorship. This was a rather negative case, but I'm going to present another one. Please, next. Okay, just to end this case, in light of these changes, Dr. Amador had an appeal for the protection of minors brought before the Constitutional Chamber, thus eliminating the voting presence of the representatives of the companies and chambers of commerce. However, during her term, representatives of the companies and chambers of commerce were still present and active. A change is proposed to the law where health comes first, and which has been discussed for several years, but it has not been approved. Next one, please. This is the second case, the positive one, and very recent. In 2018, the alcohol industry began lobbying Congress for 2 new bill proposals. First of all, I have to tell you that marketing of alcoholic beverages is banned in Costa Rica since the 1990s, related to sports. That's kind of missing in that line. So alcoholic beverages cannot sponsor any athlete. So we have, you know, people like Brisa Hennessy or Keylor Navas, who's currently at the Paris Saint-Germain playing, and all their careers, you know, have been public images, very positive, but you would never see an alcohol brand in their T-shirts or anything. So we had 2 new bills to propose alcoholic beverages and should be allowed in stadiums and gymnasiums. So public figures came forward to say, you know, they would be okay with them allowed to wear advertisements on their uniforms. And so there's a coalition which I'm a member from that is called Costa Rica Saludable, and IAFA also were initially, you know, coming forward, lobbying on Congress and trying to make members of the Legislative Assembly understand that this was not the correct way, that it was actually a regression, and it was going to leave our youth unprotected. So, but also against us was the fact that the Minister of Sports gave his full support to these new bills publicly. Next one. So I have a video on the next slide. Maybe 2 minutes of that. It's something we created so that the public could see why. Understanding why, you know, even though you can see it almost everywhere else in the world, we want our
Motivamos a los
children
niños hacia la actividad física.
Remain, you know, free of that bombardment, of that, you know, attacking that they could be exposed if we allowed marketing and advertising in places where they perform physical activity. So maybe we can pass that because I only have 2 minutes left. And gladly I can tell you that even though the efforts from the industry were strong and it even was voted positively in Congress first. Are you viewing the next slide? Because I'm not. Okay. Yes, you can view the video. It's in Spanish, but it shows the main arguments that IAFA brought forward to the public in general and to congressmen to explain why the country should leave alcohol outside stadiums and gymnasiums and sponsoring athletes. It's a constant conversation that we have with the industry. I mean, within ourselves, within Costa Rica, because of course people say, well, youth can be exposed through the internet, youth could be exposed through traveling, but still we insist that the country should not regress in that sense. So, okay, Costa Rica Saludable, this coalition in collaboration with international organizations, including WHO, started circulating a petition, collecting signatures to stop its voting in Congress. A proposal was sent to the Minister of Health to make a statement and to make the president aware of the mistake being made. And support was sought among legislators to stop these bills. And finally, a strategy was to send the bills for review to the Constitutional Chamber. This is on when there's no hope. So, but we really worked on the justification on why this shouldn't go forward. So the next one is actually the final. Yeah. So we got 12 congressmen consult the Constitutional Chamber on the bills, and the chamber's response was, Congress must legislate in the best interest towards children's health and protecting our fundamental human rights, such as health. So that's possibly the main point in this presentation, that even though we have government, even though we have laws, they can be changed and they could be lobbied against our human rights. So as citizens, we cannot just let government and our congressmen work. We should be vigilant and we should always be aware of what is going on in Congress. And as citizens, I really hope that you in the Caribbean, as youth, see this as a lesson that you should be participating actively and getting involved in government. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your views, Viviana. So we're done with our presentations, and next we'd like to move into a 10-minute question and answer session with all of our speakers. That includes Mr. Make in this Q&A too. So if anybody has any questions for Mr. Make, Professor Rohan, or Ms. Viviana, please put your questions in the chat or raise your hand and we can take them one by one. Okay, seeing as we have no questions and also that we're slightly short on time, please do send your questions in the chat box to our panelists and we'll be able to answer them. So thank you, all of our speakers, Professor Rohan, Mr. Make, and Ms. Viviana, for your views on advertising and alcohol. It was something very insightful. And as a member of the youth, I found this to be absolutely quintessential information. And I think the information that you gave us on what we should watch out for and the influence that we get from pop culture and everything around us that's subconsciously ingraining the thought of alcohol being cool in our minds is something that's very dangerous. And thank you for highlighting that. So with that, I'd like to hand it off back to Kimberly.
Thank you, Abhinav, and to our presenters in the last segment. Very interesting presentations for an industry that has more or less gone under the radar in many of our countries.